The way I came to the way of eating that I do, which is really just meat and water, is 22 years ago when I was taking cancer biology at the University of Washington in Seattle. We went over how plants use defense chemicals in order to defend themselves, but we were looking at this from a cancer perspective, so we were looking at carcinogens. And we learned 20 years ago that Brussels sprouts alone had over 136 identified human carcinogens in them. White-cap mushrooms had over 100 known carcinogens, but also spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, literally given pages and pages of every plant that you've ever come across in the grocery store, and not a single one had less than 60 known human carcinogens in them. Well, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And our professor must have just read our minds. He looked at us like, you guys aren't getting this. And he just said, I don't eat salads. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, forget plants. And I just stopped.
Do you know what an arms race is? Usually we hear about this in history, that during the Cold War, Russia and the US were competing in many different things, but one of the most important things were their military power. Russia was increasing the size of their military and the military technology and developing missiles and atomic bombs, and the US was doing the same thing. But did you know that there's been an arms race between plants and animals for hundreds of millions of years? And that's because plants defend themselves by producing toxins. So when an insect or any other animal wants to eat them for energy, they die so that they don't eat more of the plant. So the plant survives. And the animals, they develop mechanisms for dealing with these toxins so that they can gain energy without getting sick or dying. So there's an arms race. Plants continue to bolster up their defenses, and animals continue to bolster up their defenses to be able to eat the plant. So the plant doesn't want to be eaten, and the animal wants to eat. This means that when you eat a plant, you're getting plant defense chemicals into you. Now, you don't get that with animal foods, but have you thought about why that is? Well, you're an animal, and you contain meat, just like a cow. If something threatens you, you either flee or you fight it. You do it physically. You can move. You can fight. You don't need plant defense chemicals. You don't need defense chemicals. You don't need a certain chemical in your blood that will kill a mosquito if it bites you. You don't need that, because you can slap the mosquito, you can build defenses, you can run away from the mosquito, you can do all of these things. But a plant can't. So a plant's defense needs to be chemical. You know, this may seem weird. All your life you've eaten vegetables, you've gone to the grocery stores, you've bought the vegetables, you've cooked them, you've eaten them, raw even, and nothing has happened to you. But you don't realize that these are very specific plants. Okay, if you look at nature in general, most of the plants in nature are completely inedible, and a very big part of those plants are completely toxic to humans. You eat the plant, you die, or something very bad happens to you. It's the same with fungi. They either give you a religious experience or they kill you, and a few of them are edible and pretty nice tasting too. There are a bunch of humans on Earth, and you're this plant, and humans can't do anything with you. Animals can't do anything with you. And so you grow, they leave you alone, and then, you get to live your life, you get to not die, you get to reproduce. Amazing, isn't it? From the human perspective, we don't like that plant because we can't do anything with it. But genetically speaking, that plant is extremely successful, and that's the case for most plants. A very small amount of plants are edible. You might be thinking that, well, this doesn't apply to humans. Humans can eat a small amount of plants, but other animals can eat a bunch of plants. Well, that's not true. If you look at a cow, cows and ruminant animals eat very specific plants. They don't eat all plants. They eat very specific grasses and very specific parts of those grasses. Cows graze on the top of the grass. They don't eat the entire thing. They eat a very specific part of the grass and nothing else, unless humans give it greens, but that's another story. Then you look at pandas. Pandas are herbivores. They don't eat anything but plants, and the only thing they eat is one type of plant, and it's bamboo, if I'm not mistaken. They only eat one type of plant, and if they eat other plants, they get sick, because bamboo is the plant that they can handle. That's it. So now you might think, but those toxic plants don't affect me, right? Because at the grocery stores, I'm only eating things that aren't toxic to humans, and usually when I cook them, they taste pretty good. Well, did you know that Brussels sprouts have 136 carcinogens in them? Identified, known carcinogens? And that's according to Anthony Chaffee. Most of the plants you see in the grocery store have known carcinogens in them, many known carcinogens. And now you might say, well, I've eaten plants all my life, I've eaten vegetables all my life, and nothing has happened to me, and vegetables are healthy, so why shouldn't I eat them? This is obviously a very small part of the vegetable. It's not something that you're getting in very large amounts. But there's a very big hole in this type of thinking, and it is that there are people who have smoked all their lives and they live to more than 100. There are these types of chain smokers that live above 100. They become centenarians. They're rare, but it does happen. Does that mean that cigarettes contributed to them being a centenarian? Of course not. It did not. Cigarettes are unhealthy. We already know that. So how do you know that these vegetables aren't affecting you negatively? And that's the point of this video. I want you to keep watching so that you can leave here knowing what plants are toxic. I want you to know that the majority of the plants that we deem to be healthy in modern society are actually toxic, and that there are much better alternatives that are far less toxic. I want you to know when it is appropriate to consume vegetables, and I want you to know what humans in nature actually eat, what types of plants they eat. I want you to know what the species appropriate diet for humans is. You've heard about phytic acid, oxalates, tannins, this and that, but what are they actually? And have you missed some anti-nutrients? Because these are the popular ones. I actually want to start with caffeine, because caffeine is a plant defense chemical. You see, when you consume caffeine, you block adenosine and you get more energy. That's the mechanism of caffeine. But when an insect bites into the cocoa plant or the coffee bean, the coffee plant, what happens? Well, they're getting such a big dose of caffeine for their size that their nervous system gets a huge shock and they die. Caffeine kills insects and things that are trying to kill the plant that has caffeine in it. We use caffeine as a substance that gives us energy because in us it tickles our nervous system, but it kills the insect's nervous system. But there's a reason why caffeine is classified as a drug. That's because it actually is a drug. It tickles your nervous system, meaning it makes the body do things it doesn't want to do. You see, your body's perfectly capable of making the decisions on its own. If it wants to produce energy, if it wants to make you tired, it knows what it's doing. When you take in caffeine and you take in a drug, you're telling the body to send signals to do things that it otherwise wouldn't do, which means that you're depleting your resources. You're borrowing energy from the future, meaning you're going to be in debt, meaning you're going to have problems with your health in the future. The next anti-nutrient, which maybe you haven't thought about, is gluten. Gluten is an anti-nutrient, not specifically because the plant produces it so that it can defend itself, but it is the protein in wheat products. So when you make a dough, the reason it's stretchy and it holds together is because of the gluten. Gluten is again a type of protein. And this protein binds to enterocytes in our gut lining, and the enterocyte is the place where the food is absorbed. So it causes damage in the gut lining. It makes holes, it gives you leaky gut, and that will lead to a bunch of problems because small food particles will seep into your digestive tract, undigested food particles, because again, there's a huge gap. And the gap isn't supposed to be huge, it's supposed to be zero. There's supposed to be no gap. There's supposed to be a gap for nutrients to pass in, not undigested food particles, okay? So when these undigested food particles pass in into the bloodstream, the body identifies them as something that isn't supposed to be there. Obviously, they need to be cleared out, otherwise you die. So you waste a lot of resources clearing these undigested food particles out, and usually you see a bunch of inflammation. You may have heard that if you eat all of the apple, you get cyanide, and that's because there's cyanide in the seeds of an apple. Now, cyanide isn't only in apple seeds, it's also in almonds. So did you know that if you eat 400 to 800 grams, depending on your weight, of course, of almonds, you get a lethal dose of cyanide and you die? So imagine all the people eating a bunch of almond nut butter. It's the same with cassava, it's the same with a few other foods that contain cyanide. But the thing is, cassava and almonds more specifically don't contain cyanide, but they produce cyanide when attacked. More specifically, attacked by your teeth. So when you chew them, that's when the cyanide gets produced. It's a defense mechanism against you. You may argue that you don't eat any cassava whatsoever because you can't find it in the grocery store, and that you don't eat a lot of almonds to begin with. Well, here's the thing. If the lethal dose of cyanide from almonds was at 10 kilos, I'd say, okay, you have a point. But it's at 400 to 800 grams, so 600 grams on average. 600 grams is not a lot. That's a bag this big of almonds. Not that big at all. And you can clearly imagine that someone sitting there snacking on almonds might be eating 50 to 100 grams. That's quite a lot of cyanide, and that will break your health. The next anti-nutrient is insoluble fiber. Now, insoluble, what does that mean? That means you can't digest it. There's insoluble fiber, which you find in grains and legumes and all of the fibrous foods that are pretty savory, and you've got soluble fiber that you usually find in the fruits. Soluble fiber, you can actually break that down. You can actually digest that. Your bacteria can feed on that stuff and completely break it down. Insoluble fiber, they cannot. The problem with insoluble fiber is that it hinders nutrients from being absorbed by the enterocytes, by the gut lining, which means that if you eat insoluble fiber, you're blocking nutrient absorption. That's a big red flag. Not only does fiber block nutrient absorption, it also reduces vitamin D levels in the blood, surprisingly. And that's one of the funniest things I've ever heard when it comes to nutrition, that something you get from the sun is reduced by fiber. It really gives fiber a bad name. And if you think that insoluble fiber is very important for digestive health and not being constipated, well, here's a study showing that people who have digestive problems benefit greatly from removing all fiber in their diet. Next, we've got the two most famous bandits sailing the anti-nutrient sea: phytic acid and oxalates. You've just eaten a very, very healthy meal and you paid a lot of money for, let's say, this colostrum or whatever it might be, this beautiful piece of meat. But you also ate phytic acid and oxalates. Now imagine you digested this food perfectly, and now you're going to absorb all these wonderful nutrients. Now imagine that phytic acid and oxalates bind to the magnesium and the calcium and the zinc, and they don't allow you to absorb the minerals. How will you feel? Not so good, right? So what should you do? Avoid them. Listen, if you eat phytic acid or oxalates one time, or let's say once per year, will that harm you? Yes, but no. It won't be a big effect because usually when you eat, you're not getting those things. Now, if you eat them every day because you're a vegan, and we compare you to someone who doesn't consume these things, what do you think the difference over time is? So you're losing all this calcium and magnesium and zinc and all these minerals that you eat because oxalates and phytic acid are binding to them. Well, I don't, let's say. What's going to happen? Well, on a one-day basis, sure, it doesn't matter that much. But over the course of, let's say, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, even a few months, you're losing far more minerals than I am. If we suddenly realize something very significant about nutrition and we can apply it to every single meal, that's something that's worth implementing our entire lives. So whenever we think about something in terms of nutrition, in terms of avoiding or consuming, we should think about our entire lifespan. And, you know, it's just like investing. If you invest for a month, you're not going to get an 8% return on the stock market. But if you invest for a year, you're probably going to get those 8%. Now, over the course of 10 years, you're going to get compound interest, pretty good compound interest. 40 years, you're going to get a lot of compound interest. So it's the same thing. If you avoid phytic acid and oxalates for 40 years, how much of a difference does that make? What I'm saying is that the longer you avoid these things, the more return on investment you get. Now, that's not the entire picture. For phytic acid, it seems to be the case that all it does is bind to minerals and then bye-bye. It doesn't have any other harmful effects that I know of. With oxalates, it's a different story because oxalates aren't eliminated in the same way. They seem to be absorbed and then they need to be eliminated through the kidney. Oxalates seem to be some kind of pollution and it often leads to kidney stones. How do we know this? Well, because oxalates accumulate in the kidneys. If you chemically analyze a kidney stone, you will usually find oxalates there. This is a very common phenomenon. And usually kidney stones also contain a bunch of heavy metals and pollutants and this and that. Of course, kidney stones are a form of elimination. It's not the body doing some mistake. It's you eliminating a bunch of stuff that's so toxic that it has to accumulate like a stone, and it has to exit like a stone to not harm the cells. A bit later in the video, we're going to discuss what indigenous people do in terms of vegetables and vegetable juices, but as a tip that you should apply to that part of the video, pick the vegetables that don't contain a bunch of oxalates, okay? Because oxalates seem to be pretty harmful. We can't forget about the infamous phytoestrogen. Phytoestrogens are found in the highest concentrations and most commonly in soy. And the amount of phytoestrogen inside of soy is far, far higher than in birth control pills. And you might say, oh, well, there have been studies showing that phytoestrogens don't work in the way estrogen does. And this is true because it's not the same molecule. But it's close enough to estrogen to trigger the effects of estrogen in people. And the reason we know this is because when you give sheep a bunch of soy, it reduces their fertility. What happens after you eat carbohydrates? Your blood glucose goes up. What happens when your blood glucose goes up? Well, some hormone needs to tell your body that that's the case, that it needs to utilize the glucose. So, for that purpose, we have insulin. So, insulin goes up, and then it should go down, right? That should happen if everything is normal, right? But if you eat lectins, lectins can bind to your insulin receptors, thereby giving you an insulin response, even though, let's say, you didn't eat that many carbohydrates. So that's what that anti-nutrient does. That's not the end of the story. It also binds to leptin receptors. So if you didn't know, ghrelin is the hunger hormone. When you're hungry, you have a bunch of ghrelin going through you. If you're full, that's leptin. If you bind to leptin receptors, that means that you're not going to be full. You're going to keep eating. That's what's going to happen. Lectins also like the sugar part of your cells, and we've got this sugar part in our cell membrane. So when lectins pass through our gut lining, they basically cause leaky gut by destroying the cell membranes of enterocytes, so the gut cells. A study was done on 800 people who excluded lectins from their diet, and what happened is less cell damage. They lowered TNF-alpha, which is an inflammatory marker, and whenever you lower inflammation, that means that your body has less to do, which is a good thing because you free up energy. You've got less cell damage in general. You find lectins in legumes, grains, dairy, and vegetable oils, and if you want to reduce lectin content, if you can soak it, soak it. If you can soak legumes, if you're going to eat legumes or grains, soak them. That's generally a practice that every intelligent culture does with grains and legumes, but some people are lazy and they don't do this. So please, soak your grains, soak your legumes. And in fact, don't eat legumes. And be very careful with grains. And with vegetable oils, obviously, you should avoid them. Now, I did say dairy, you heard me right. So that means that if you get raw dairy from a very high quality source, you're still going to have lectins in there. What should you do about it? Some people can tolerate it. I believe some people cannot tolerate it. It depends on your tolerance level, it depends on your genes, it depends on the cow or what animal it is. It might be a goat or a camel. There are different lectins there. There are many different lectins. So, if you can't tolerate, let's say, fresh raw milk, and I have many people who come to me and say that this is the case, I believe it might be due to the lectins. It might be that those pimples you get and the indigestion and whatever it might be due to the lectins. And I believe that when you ferment the milk, most people can tolerate it in its fermented state, including me, far better. I believe that's because you break down the lectins. I believe you reduce the lectin content drastically. So, yet another reason to ferment your milk. Then there are some pesky ones. You've got saponins, which kill red blood cells. They damage the gut lining. They inhibit thyroid function. You've got tannins, and these are very pesky because if you eat tannins with anything that contains protein, these are enzyme inhibitors, and they more specifically inhibit protein enzymes, protein digesting enzymes, which means that those enzymes will not be able to break down, let's say, meat. So if you're eating tannins from, let's say, legumes, and you're eating meat with that, you're messing up protein digestion. There's also solanine. Solanine increases the potassium concentrations inside of your cell, thereby killing it. It also inhibits acetylcholine, which if you have enough solanine and you inhibit enough of the acetylcholine activity, you die because you're very dependent on acetylcholine. Solanine is found in all nightshades, I believe, most commonly potatoes and tomatoes. So with potatoes, you know when the potato is green and someone eats that and they die? That's because of solanine. With tomatoes, I believe it's mainly found in the seeds and the skin as well. So remove the skin. I don't believe you can do anything with the seeds. You can't really digest the seeds, so if you want to leave them there, but remove the skin. And with potatoes, do the same thing. Peel them. Then you've got aflatoxins and mycotoxins. I believe these mainly occur in chocolate, coffee, and nuts, and maybe even seeds, because of the way they store them. You know, you've got, let's say, humidity, and you've got them stored in a big truck, and because of the humidity, you've got this mold that grows, and the mold produces these mycotoxins and aflatoxins, and they're found in, again, peanuts, almonds, cashews, and especially coffee and chocolate. Mycotoxins and aflatoxins are one of the biggest reasons why you should avoid most chocolate, even if it's dark and organic and whatnot, and coffee, unless you can get a very good source of both of them that says that they don't contain any of these things. Then there's also phototoxicity. So there are compounds in certain plants, when we expose them to our skin or when we consume them and they go to our skin, when sunlight hits them, they create severe damage. There's a big, huge reaction and you get severe burns. So for example, if you handle celery, you're touching, celery, and you're pulling it out and you're putting it in a basket, or you're cutting it up in the sun for some reason because you love cooking outside, or you're squeezing limes, or you're doing stuff with parsnips, and the sun hits you, you're going to get severe burns. Handling phototoxic plants is one thing. How about consuming them and them being exposed to sunlight? What happens then? Well, there was a case with a tanning bed and a woman who consumed a bunch of celery juice, which contains phototoxins, and she got burns. But this was pretty close in conjunction to the celery consumption, and it was also a source that was emitting far more UV in relation to everything else that you get from the sun. So it was quite an unnatural setting. Although I'm not sure if this is a case of phototoxicity, I still want to share it. From January to the middle of April, I drank celery juice every 2 to 3 days on average. Sometimes I went a week without celery juice, especially at the end. Now, I began sunbathing this year at the 30th of April, so the end of April, and then in the entirety of May. And the first few sunbathing sessions, I got a few burns. Now, usually when you get a sunburn, you get an equal amount of sunburn everywhere, right? I got it only on specific places. My left arm, a little bit of my left leg, and the left side of my chest, my shoulders, and a little bit over here at my neck. No other place got sunburnt. And remember, the face is more sensitive, so the first place that should get sunburnt, if exposed to the sun, should be your face. Now, that didn't happen. I didn't consume any celery juice from the middle of April until now, and I haven't gotten any problems in the sun anymore. I don't think this was a classic case of UV skin damage and circulation going into the area, which is the redness that you usually see with a sunburn. I think this was the compounds in celery being stored inside of the skin and then getting activated in small amounts, because it wasn't a severe burn, it was just a little bit of redness that went away after 1 day or so, and that's it. But wait a minute, everybody in modern society, especially the medical establishment, the nutritionists, and all the children who were taught this at a young age, say that vegetables are healthy. So how come I'm telling you that the opposite is the case, and that vegetables are actually a source of anti-nutrients and they contain a bunch of carcinogens? Well, Galileo Galilei was of course correct about his observations, but the society at the time couldn't really accept what he was saying, so they executed him. He was right. He was the only one who believed what he had found. No one else believed him, but he was the one who was right. So the amount of people who believe something has nothing to do with whether something is true or not. If something is true or not is dependent on the thing itself, not our beliefs about it. So for example, Jack Kruse is right about UV. We have UV receptors everywhere on our skin and in our eyes, but the dermatologists say that we need to avoid UV because it is only harmful. Well, it is clear that no, we absolutely need UV, and without it we can't function. So I urge you to be open-minded in regards to our discussion about vegetables. Now, the first thing you have to realize about foods is that they have different degrees of bioavailability. So just because you eat something and you see that it contains this many nutrients, those nutrients, you absorbing them, depends on how well you can digest that food. So a stone contains a lot of minerals, but it's not bioavailable to us. Why? Because Our digestive system can do nothing with that stone, right? With meat, we can do a lot. With fruit, we can do a lot. But with plants, we cannot break down cellulose. So we can't do anything with plants, which means that unless we ferment the vegetable or we cook the vegetable, which increases the bioavailability, we can't really do anything with the raw vegetable. And even if we cook it and even if we ferment it, the bioavailability will not increase by a lot. So we can't really access the nutrients in vegetables even if we do things to them, even if we process them to some degree or we ferment them. Speaking of nutrients inside of vegetables, there aren't a lot to begin with. If you compare the nutrient density of vegetables to that of animal foods, you don't find that vegetables are that nutrient dense. So the majority of your nutrition is coming from animal organs and meat, not from the vegetables themselves. If you have a plate with rice and meat and vegetables, the healthiest thing, the most nutrient dense thing on that plate is actually the meat. That's where all the nutrients are, not the veggies, which means that if you remove the veggies, you're not really losing any nutrients. Vegetables also contain no essential nutrients, which means that if you cut them out, you're not losing a single nutrient that is only found in vegetables. Everything is in animal foods. In fact, vegetables are lacking in essential nutrients. When you look at animal foods, they contain B12, vitamin A, not beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is not vitamin A. It might be converted if you're very good at that and if you can digest all the plant beta-carotene correctly and you have the right genes, but otherwise there's no vitamin A. So vitamin A in the form of retinol, the correct two forms of B6, pyridoxamine and pyridoxal, the correct form of vitamin K, vitamin K2 in the MK4 form, not the MK7 form found in natto and soybeans. No, the MK4 form is only in animal foods. You got carnitine, carnosine, glycine, and taurine. A third of the population can't produce, I believe it's carnitine. So you need to eat carnitine, you need to eat meat to get carnitine for a third of the population. Glycine is also a very important amino acid, only found in animal foods. There's an article by Chris Masterjohn where he's talking about heme iron, and heme iron is far more easily absorbed than the iron in plants, so non-heme iron. And he's saying that if you want to get the same amount of iron eating plant-based iron, you need to eat 3 to 4 times more iron because that iron is not easily absorbed. It's not bioavailable. He says, his basic conclusion is, in that article, is that if you want good iron levels, if you have iron problems, eat heme iron. That's it, because it's so much more bioavailable than non-heme iron. There's also DHA, there's vitamin D, there are many more examples, but the gist of it is that if you don't eat animal foods, you're missing many nutrients. And if you want to take supplements, you have to assume that that supplement is clean, that you have enough money for those supplements, that the dosage in the supplement is alright, and that the molecule itself is the same and it acts the same in your body, and that you're not missing anything that's very specific to that vitamin, because some vitamins are complexes. Vitamin E is not a vitamin, it's 8 different or 16 different molecules. So good luck getting that in a supplement, for example. The same applies to many other vitamins. Does your body ever lie to you? When you feel like vomiting, something's coming up, right? There's pain, something's wrong. If someone punches you in the face, do you feel pain? Yes. If your skin is getting burnt, do you feel pain? Yes. If you're itching, is something happening over there? Yes. Your body never lies to you. It's the same with your sense of taste, okay? If you eat something bitter and it tastes really bad, there's probably something bad in it that you're not supposed to eat. So if you eat Brussels sprouts or kale and it tastes bad, that's because there's something poisonous within it. Again, 136 carcinogens in Brussels sprouts. When children eat Brussels sprouts, they're not very happy. When they eat meat, they're very happy. Their body's giving them the right signal. It's not that Brussels sprouts are healthy, it's that they're bad. It's not that meat is unhealthy, it's that meat is good. We know this, and we'll get into that later.
People may know of Jordan Peterson, his daughter Mikhaila Peterson, who had such severe juvenile rheumatoid arthritis that she had 2 joint replacements of her ankle and I believe her hip when she was 16 years old. She eliminated she went keto first and eliminated out a lot of different toxins and nightshades in particular, and had very, very good results. Then she dropped all the salads as well, just went to pure meat and water diet. Now she's off all medications and she's having kids, and she's healthy. She has not had a single flare-up. She had salad once, and that gave her a flare-up. And so he's like, right, never doing that again.
So if a bunch of people feel good cutting out vegetables and you're still skeptical, the only way to find out if they're correct is not by being skeptical and saying that all they're saying is bullshit. The way you do it is you cut out the vegetables and you evaluate, having done so, yourself. Plants don't just contain plant toxins. They don't just disrupt your hormones, give you leaky gut, impair nutrient absorption, chelate minerals and take them out. They don't just contain coumarin and tannins and solanine, poison, things that kill your red blood cells and kill intestinal cells. No, they're also completely unnecessary in the diet. You can just eat animal foods and you'll be fine. But in modern society, I would say that there is a need for plant foods because they do things that animal foods don't. They contain medicinal properties that are very good in some cases. For example, I was dealing with increased heart rate. I introduced celery juice and it fixed the problem. Now the reasons for that, it's very complex. There are other things that I have done now that have made it so that I don't need celery juice. Suffice to say, many plants have medicinal properties and including them can be a very good idea. They're a source of nutrition for many isolated and primitive tribes, throughout history. Nowadays, there aren't many isolated and primitive tribes, so we have to look at the past to see if anyone studied them. And luckily, there was a guy, and we're going to talk about him in a moment. Before we do so, I want you to understand the heart and the soul of this video, and maybe even the heart and the soul of nutrition. And to my knowledge, I'm the only person who has come up with this concept, but it's pretty logical, and I believe it should be, something that's fundamental when it comes to nutrition science and nutrition thinking. It's called positive and negative aspects of food. So when you eat a food, there are positive things that it gives you, and there are also negative things that it gives you. So on a very elementary level, let's look at McDonald's. So if you're starving, should you eat McDonald's? If that's the only thing you can eat to continue living, should you eat McDonald's? Well, probably. You should probably eat the glyphosate-filled, seed oil-filled burger because it's better than dying. Dying is the most unhealthy thing, isn't it? In the context of not needing to die. So, in that case, you're continuing to live, you're getting caloric energy, but you're also getting all these negative aspects. I don't think I need to explain why McDonald's is unhealthy. Now let's try to apply this thinking to other foods. So if you look at a tomato, well, are there problems with the skin of the tomato? Are there plant defense chemicals there? Yes. Are there plant defense chemicals in the seeds? Yes. Are there plant defense chemicals in the flesh? Probably, but in lower amounts. So if we remove the skin and we don't bother to remove the seeds, well, will the seeds be digested? Probably not. If we chew one of the seeds, will the contents of the seed go into our body? Probably. Will that be one seed out of many seeds in the tomato? Yes. Is eating the tomato a problem then? Yes, because there are toxins inside of the tomato regardless. But what do you get? Well, you get lots of water. You get vitamin C, you get some minerals as well. It's a very good hydrator. And in the context of that, and let's say you need that in your situation, is it a bad thing to consume the tomato? No, because if we look at the net effect, for most people, the net effect is positive. Yes, you have some things that are bad, that your body has to deal with, but most of the things are pretty positive, which means that if you take the positive things minus the negative things, the thing you're left with is a positive outcome. You see what I mean? If we look at meat through this new lens, we see that meat is mostly a perfect food. There are just a bunch of positive things with meat. The only bad thing is that it's protein, and protein is the hardest thing for us to digest. Luckily, most of our enzymes and our entire, digestive tract is designed to break down meat. Most of the enzymes that we have, the digestive enzymes, are designed to break down protein, then you've got fat, and then a few are designed to break down starches. So with meat, the positive aspects are certainly there, and the negative aspects are even hard to consider. You have to really squeeze your mind to find a negative aspect with meat. And that's the way it is with all foods. This is only one part of the story, because the negative aspects themselves are dependent on you. Okay, and what do I mean by this? They're dependent on your resilience. So let me give you an example that's very important. Say you're one of my clients, or one of the people who emailed me a while ago, whose case is absolutely devastating. If you eat a piece of ginger or something that contains plant toxins, how do you think you will fare in comparison to someone who's healthy, who can digest a lot of protein and rice, and who looks very healthy and can exercise without any problems and has all of this resilience? How do you think you'll handle that vegetable, or let's say that piece of ginger? Remember, it's the same piece of ginger. It's the same vegetable. It's the same whatever we're comparing. But one person is taking far more damage in total than the other person. I'm not just talking about the amount of damage someone can handle. I'm talking about how much damage this one piece of ginger will produce in total. It's not that if you have 10 damage points over here and 10 damage points over here, this guy with IBS is going to be affected severely, while this guy isn't going to be affected by 10 damage points. I'm saying that this guy will take 10 damage points from the ginger, while this guy will take 100 or 200 damage points because of their impaired digestive tract, because of their health problems. So now the carnivore cases make sense. Mikhaila Peterson's case makes sense. Jordan Peterson's case makes sense. If you have all of these pre-existing health issues, for example, Mikhaila Peterson had mold toxicity. She's even talked about this herself, and she links that to her food sensitivities. If you have all of these pre-existing conditions, and then you've got the thing that might cause problems, you'll take far more damage, okay? And because you have these pre-existing conditions, you have no resilience. So compare Mikhaila Peterson to a primitive or isolated person. Earlier I was talking about a guy who had studied a bunch of isolated and primitive tribes and compared them to modernized people who are sick. This guy is called Weston A. Price. Now I'm not going to go into depth about him. I want you to watch this video. This is probably one of the most important videos I've ever made. It's in a different style. It's very important. Go and watch it if you haven't. Because of his book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, we know what humans in nature eat. We know what isolated and primitive people eat in nature. And we're not just talking about one or two examples. Price went around the entire world and looked at primitive and isolated people. So we're talking about you studying what tigers eat all across the world and trying to conclude what they're supposed to eat. Well, you go to the Bengal tiger eats a bunch of meat. You go to the Siberian tiger eats a bunch of meat. You go to any type of tiger all across the world and you find that they eat meat. It's the same with lions, okay? It's not that hard to conclude that tigers, wherever they are in the world, are hyper-carnivores. You can do the same with humans. You can use this book to conclude what it is that humans should eat. And obviously we're omnivores, we can handle most food groups. But we do well with some food groups while we do worse with other food groups, especially in modern society. We're interested in plant and anti-nutrient consumption. So what we need to do is we need to look at a bunch of tribes and we need to see, okay, how is their plant and anti-nutrient consumption, and did that affect them in any way? And if we do that, then we can start to draw some conclusions. The Inuits, or as Price refers to them, the Eskimos, they actually don't just eat meat. Trust me, most of their diet is meat and fat, raw meat and fat. That's mostly what they eat, but it's not all of what they eat. They do eat some sea vegetables from the sea, seaweed for example. They do eat some ground nuts that tundra mice usually eat. When blueberries were in season, they ate blueberries. Again, it was not a large part of the year, but when they were in season, they ate blueberries, so they ate blueberries yearly, and they even stored the blueberries. The fact of the matter is that all vegetation contains anti-nutrients. These sea vegetables do contain anti-nutrients, but they continued eating them, and they continued eating them because they didn't feel any bad effects, because they could handle them. And you're going to see that that's a theme here. You've also got the Aborigines of Australia, and they're really fascinating, you know, the way Price writes about them in the book, because they're absolutely fantastic hunters. Out of all the tribes he looked at, they were the best. Because it was very dry over there, they had to find other ways of getting water, of getting hydration. So what they did was, they took these root vegetables, and they took their knives and they made shavings from the root vegetable. They made these shavings, and then they take these shavings and they squeeze them like this, and they get water from it. What does this mean? This means that they're juicing root vegetables. Now, do root vegetables contain anti-nutrients? Yes, probably, of course. Usually that's the case. Were they affected negatively? Maybe, but they could certainly handle it without any problems whatsoever. It certainly didn't lead to any kind of disease. However, these two tribes aren't very good examples because they were mostly eating animal foods. We're talking 95 to 99% of their diet was animal foods, nose to tail. The Inuit from the sea, the Aborigines of Australia, we're talking anything they could get their hands on. Kangaroos, wallabies, fish, anything in their vicinity. So I want to mention two groups of people. One of them Price studied, the other one Price didn't study. The one Price studied is the Lötschental Valley people, the isolated Lötschental Valley people. And these people, a staple of their diet was rye bread. So we're talking about something that does contain gluten, it does contain lectins, it does contain a few anti-nutrients. What you have to realize is that the Lötschental people and many traditional cultures, through generations of experience and really digging into this stuff, they found ways of bypassing anti-nutrients and extracting the nutrition from plants without damaging themselves. So when it comes to this rye bread that they were making, obviously they were soaking the rye, which greatly reduces lectin content, and then they were making sourdough bread out of it. These two steps reduce anti-nutrient content drastically. And remember, there's no glyphosate on the rye, there are no pesticides on the rye, and those things are far worse, I'd say, than anti-nutrients. And they were eating it with butter, which means that the butter protected their intestines from any damage. Usually all these cultures eat starch with some kind of fat. These were healthy, resilient people, no stress, no insomnia, very good nutrition in general. They were getting very high quality stuff from very high quality soils, lots of sunlight, perfect circadian rhythm. Everything about their lifestyle was perfect. They had no gut issues, of course. They had no brain issues, no degeneration whatsoever. With all of these things in mind, do you believe this rye bread was affecting them negatively? No, of course not. It wasn't doing anything to them except giving them carbohydrates, starch, together with this butter that they really slathered on this rye bread. And it was really high quality rye bread, really high quality butter from very, very nutrient dense milk. What I'm trying to say is that yes, rye does contain a bunch of anti-nutrients, and usually if you prepare it unintelligently, you will get damage. But if you use soaking and fermentation, and you do many things correctly and intelligently, you eat it with butter, you know what you're doing in general, you can take something that contains anti-nutrients and you can make it the staple of your diet, and you can have a very, very healthy group of people eating a bunch of rye bread. And if you read the book, it becomes very clear that the Lötschental people didn't have any diseases, they didn't have any cavities, they didn't have any degeneration whatsoever. They were just as healthy as the Maasai. But the real treasure in terms of indigenous people are two tribes that weren't mentioned by Weston A. Price. He didn't visit them, but there have been documentaries made about them, and I learned about them from Varis Ahmad, my good friend Varis Ahmad. Go check out his channel, I've got a link in the description. You've got the Asaro tribe in Papua New Guinea, and you've got the Waroni tribe in the Amazon rainforest. Now both of these tribes eat a lot of starch, tubers, corn, anything that's starch based that they find in their natural environment. Both of them are eating animals nose to tail, don't get me wrong, fish, pig, whatever it might be. They're eating animals nose to tail. They're getting a lot of their nutrition from animal foods, but they are eating a lot of starch. They are eating foods that are high in anti-nutrients. They're probably neutralizing the anti-nutrients really well through their preparation methods. Usually they take anything that's starch-based and they usually make it into paste. They might ferment it, they cook it, they do a lot of things with it before consuming it. And they're relying off of these things for sustenance, and they're perfectly healthy. So anthropologically speaking, when we look at isolated and primitive tribes all across the world, it seems as though they do consume foods that are high in anti-nutrients, but they use their brains, we use our brains as humans, to find ways to consume these things without creating too many problems. Now, even though you prepare them really well, even though you prepare, let's say, these anti-nutrient rich foods really well, like the primitives do, will you not run into problems? Will you be as healthy as them? No. Their tolerance is through the roof because they do absolutely everything perfectly. They've got no pollution, their circadian biology is perfect. If you mention teenage acne, mental health problems, insomnia, any of these things that you think are common in modern society, it doesn't exist in their world. That's how healthy they are. Again, perfect circadian biology, no pollution, perfect nutrition, everything in their environment is perfect because they're living like humans are supposed to. And so can they tolerate certain anti-nutrients? Of course. If you live in modern society, the story is different. So it depends on your tolerance. And again, as I said, when they eat a certain anti-nutrient, they might take 0.1 points of damage. You might take 10 or even 100, depending on how sick you are. So to answer the question of will plants kill you, it depends on your tolerance. If you're an Asaro tribesman in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, I don't think you need to be worried about eating the stuff in your natural environment that everyone else is eating. Again, that's in your local environment, that comes from really good soils, that's prepared correctly. Still, there are anti-nutrients there, but you can handle it. Your intestinal lining is pristine, okay? And your health is pristine in general. If you're someone who lives in modern society, yeah, they will hurt you. You should probably avoid them as much as you can, but you can still tolerate a little bit if you prepare everything correctly. And if you're one of my clients, or you just have digestive issues, or you're sick, you're dealing with this, you're dealing with that, you should be pretty careful. You shouldn't be going around eating potato skins. You should probably be sticking to white rice if you're going to eat plants, if you're going to eat a grain. If you're going to make bread, you should really read up on how to make bread the traditional way, making sourdough, picking the correct wheat, soaking the wheat, doing everything you can to reduce the anti-nutrient content, and eating it with lots of animal fat. And that might even give you problems if you're really sick. For most of the video, I've grouped plants and vegetables together. I've mostly talked about vegetables, vegetation. Vegetation doesn't want to die. But from vegetation, or I should say certain types of vegetation, especially angiosperms, if you want to be biologically accurate, produce fruits. They're fruit-bearing plants. It's vegetation that makes fruit. What is the purpose of fruit? Fruit is supposed to be eaten by mammals so that the seeds in the fruit can germinate inside of the animal's digestive tract. The animal shits out the seeds together with the feces, and the feces are, of course, very nutrient rich, and then a new plant grows. So animals spread the seeds of plants through fruits, which means that fruits want to be eaten, meaning they are the least toxic plant food out there. However, not all fruits are supposed to be eaten by humans. So what I mean is that some fruits are going to be toxic to us, but not other animals. So there are species of birds that are able to eat a fruit and make sure that the seeds germinate inside of them, while if we were to eat the fruit, nothing would happen to the seeds, essentially, because we have a very different digestive system, and the fruit would be very toxic to us, and it wouldn't taste good, and it would probably not have the nutrition that you're seeking. You have to realize that the relationship fruits and animals have with humans is vastly different. We're a very big exception, because when something is resourceful to us, we automatically promote it because we understand nature. So let's say we find a certain variety of apples that we find tastes really good and it's really nutritious and it comes with no problems. It's very suited for us and we really like eating it. What will we do? We will spread its genetic material because we have mastered the art of agriculture, of farming. And I'm talking about regenerative agriculture. I'm talking about a tribe or a group of people that aren't using modern technology, okay? We can do this without modern technology. Just like we reward plants, we've also rewarded other animals. So think of dogs. We don't kill dogs. We don't eat them for meat. You might say that, okay, well, we've domesticated livestock, but that's because we want their milk and we want their meat and we're killing them. We're not letting them live. Sure, that might be the case, but with dogs, we let them live their entire lives. We protect them. We provide them with food. And they also help us. So whatever helps humans survive in nature, humans reward. Meaning that when we discovered how plants reproduce, we started hybridizing plants. Which means that, well, let's say you have two cows. One of the cows produces a lot of milk, the other one doesn't produce a lot of milk, and all factors are the same otherwise. Will you let the bull reproduce with the cow that produces a lot of milk or the one that doesn't produce a lot of milk? You see what I mean? It's the same with plants. If you know that a certain fruit-bearing plant will produce nicer juicier, tastier fruits that, let's say, are less bitter, you'll hybridize them. You have to realize that hybridization happens anyway. Plants reproduce anyway. They pass on and exchange their genetic material anyway, just like humans do. However, in different ways. It's just that with hybridization, we're helping the process to aid in our survival so that we can get the types of plant species that we want. For example, you've got blueberries and raspberries creating boysenberries. A boysenberry is just the genetic material of a blueberry and a raspberry joined together through natural pollination. So remember, hybridization is a natural process. Nature is doing what nature does, but humans are fiddling a little bit, while GMO is human science that's trying to mess with nature too much, and that creates real problems. Because you're not supposed to mess with the genes of a plant. Nature is supposed to do that, not us. The point of this is to say that the fruits in your natural environment, are the ones that you should be eating. They're perfectly fine to consume, because generally speaking, they're very well tailored for humans. So let's look at oranges. Do they contain a lot of anti-nutrients? Not really. Do you eat the seeds? No. Do you eat the skin? No. That's where the anti-nutrients are. You eat the flesh. That's all you eat. If you're in Mexico or in Brazil and you have all these orange trees around you, why don't you eat oranges? Let's put all of this together into 4 steps. The first step is make sure the fruit is local. So if you've got an orange tree near you, if you've got an apple tree near you, get your fruit from there. That's the perfect thing to do because it's very local. You know it doesn't contain any pesticides. You know, if you've got blueberries in the forest, go and get blueberries from the forest. Don't go to the grocery store. If you can't find that, make sure you buy fruits that are grown in the same country that you reside in and make sure they're organic. And ideally, make sure that they're on the Clean 15. Step 2, remove the skin and remove the seeds. Okay, so when you eat an apple, if you have any digestive problems, if you have any autoimmune issues, this or that, remove the skin. You know, the skin on an apple is very easy to eat for humans, so we don't remove it. But with an orange, we do remove it because it doesn't taste good. It contains more anti-nutrients. Well, the principle is the same. Just like an orange has the skin to protect it, the skin is protecting the apple. So all the anti-nutrients are there. So if you remove the skin on the apple, you'll remove a lot of the anti-nutrients. And of course, don't eat the core. It contains cyanide. Step 3, taste it. Use your mouth. Your mouth will tell you if there are anti-nutrients there. If it tastes really bitter, bad, not appealing, something's wrong with it, something seems toxic in it, don't eat it. If it's an avocado, a banana, an orange, an apple, a coconut, obviously the flesh doesn't contain a lot of anti-nutrients at all. And step 4, eat it in the sun. Okay, to minimize the blood sugar spike. When you eat something in the sun, the glucose response is far, far better. And if you eat something in blue light, my God, the blood sugar response is really, really bad. So make sure you're eating the fruit in the right environment and make sure you're moving too. Glucose uptake is far better, and glucose utilization, of course, is far better when you're moving. Since I'm a big fan of Ogenes Wonderplanet's work in terms of nutrition, obviously I have to discuss vegetable juices because they're a bit controversial. You see, there are some people who go with Ogenes' protocol and they cut out the vegetable juices because they believe that it contains a bunch of anti-nutrients and that all plants are unhealthy. Other people follow the protocol. Now, I will say this. Obviously, I can't present you with a peer-reviewed study on primal dieters who drink vegetable juice as opposed to primal dieters who don't drink vegetable juice. What I can tell you is general responses from the community, which is that most people who struggle with over-acidity, as Ogenes calls it, or basically being lethargic, having a low appetite, not wanting to eat, being a little bit tired, so on and so forth, when they drink vegetable juices, and let's say they weren't doing that before, all of those symptoms go away. When you eat a bunch of raw animal foods in modern society, what happens is that suddenly you have all of these nutrients that your body didn't have before. And obviously one of the things that your body really wants to do is get rid of the things that shouldn't be in it. Again, it's very, very good at detoxifying stuff. All it needs is enough resources. So now suddenly you've removed a bunch of stuff that was damaging your body, i.e. your toxic diet and a bunch of pollution, and you're supplying a bunch of good stuff. So what happens is your body can now detoxify more effectively. And there's a lot to detoxify. So what happens is that there's a lot of pollution going through you. being eliminated, and it uses the blood as a pathway for that. Vegetable juices seem to have the medicinal properties to counteract that, because it is this process of detoxification through the blood that causes the lethargy and the decreased appetite and this and that. I've personally had this. Vegetable juices helped. Other people have had this as well. Vegetable juices helped. Ogenes seems to have discovered this, and he made vegetable juices a staple of the diet so that no one will run into this problem, and they're also good for minerals and hydration and this and that. However, some people will have problems with anti-nutrients. This goes back to the net effect principle. If you feel like you're doing great on celery juice and carrot juice, and you feel like you're solving the problems that Ogenes has talked about that happen when you don't drink vegetable juice and you only consume raw animal foods on the diet, then obviously the net effect for you is great. If you're drinking celery juice and carrot juice and you don't feel good on them, the anti-nutrients are too much for you, and maybe you should cut them out. This is going to be a specific tip, but with celery, what you want is very light celery. The dark celery has far more anti-nutrients. Again, from January to April, I made a lot of celery juice, so I have a lot of experience. What I found is that the light celery stalks, when you juice them, you get a very sweet, coconut-tasting type of drink. And obviously it has very low anti-nutrients in that case, because obviously you can taste the anti-nutrients in celery if there are a bunch of anti-nutrients in the celery stalk that you picked. Whenever I juiced a dark celery stalk, it felt really bad in the mouth. You know, it was bitter, it wasn't very good. If you juice the leaves, you'll get the same effect. The leaves are filled with anti-nutrients. Don't juice them, remove them from the celery stalk. Saliva neutralizes some of the anti-nutrients. So what I noticed is that if it tastes really bitter right after juicing, it will stay that way. But if I spit in it, if I put some celery in my mouth, mix it with saliva, and then put it back into the glass, and I leave that for 3 to 5 minutes, suddenly it tastes much sweeter. It's like many of the anti-nutrients have been neutralized. So what I think is that saliva neutralizes some anti-nutrients, which means that if you keep the thing in your mouth a little bit, it might neutralize some anti-nutrients that are in the food. This applies to celery really well, but I don't know how it will apply to other foods. There's also wheatgrass juice, which is pretty high in anti-nutrients, and it tastes really bitter, but Varis Ahmad recommends it, and let me tell you why. It's very high in trace minerals, so we're not just talking about sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. We're talking about the stuff that's on the periodic table that you've probably never heard of. So Varis might recommend a bunch of anti-nutrients to you, but he's also giving you something that contains a bunch of trace minerals that you won't get from any other source. So you're getting something that's very, very scarce, and you're also paying a little bit of a toll for it. You're paying some tax on it. It will hurt you a little bit, but you're getting something that's pretty valuable. So some plants have medicinal properties, and they also have a bunch of anti-nutrients. So my recommendation is to not blindly trust plants and say that anti-nutrients are perfect and they don't harm you and they're actually beneficial like the vegans, and don't say that all anti-nutrients are bad and you should never consume them like the carnivores. You should be flexible. Each person has their own situation and they might benefit from something that's in the plant kingdom. But again, in most cases, it makes sense that the majority of your diet doesn't contain anti-nutrients. This video is sponsored by the anti-nutrient detector. So there's this really cool device where if you stick food inside of it, it tells you if there are anti-nutrients in it. I am, of course, talking about your mouth. Okay, this video isn't sponsored by anyone. I'm just trying to make this sound cool, because you would pay a lot of money for such a device, but you've already got it. You see, when you drink, let's say, wheatgrass juice, and it tastes really bad, that's because there are a bunch of anti-nutrients inside of the wheatgrass juice. Your body's telling you that there's something bad going on here. If you eat the rind of an orange, you eat the orange skin, and it tastes really bad, that's because there are a bunch of anti-nutrients in there. You can do the same with all other foods, with all vegetation, with all fruits. Okay, you have an anti-nutrient detector here. So the first plant principle is to use taste to see if a food is toxic or not. If it tastes really bitter, really bad, then it's probably got anti-nutrients in it. Use your taste to know if there are anti-nutrients in a food. However, you have cases where this amazing Arab chef makes a chickpea, potato, meat and bread type soup, and you've got a bunch of anti-nutrients in the spices, you've got a bunch of gluten in the bread, and you've got a bunch of anti-nutrients in the chickpeas, and the next day you're going to be really bloated and your digestive system is going to be completely messed up and you'll mess up your gut lining. But it tastes really good and you can't detect anything. So what do? Well, what you do is you learn about nutrition. You learn about nutrition. You watch this video, you understand that there are anti-nutrients in all legumes, in all grains, especially badly prepared grains, and you limit yourself to animal foods most of the time to avoid these kinds of situations. So, taste and knowledge. The second plant principle is defenses. So, what parts of this thing is the plant protecting? Is it the plant itself that we're talking about? Because the vegetation itself is the plant. So, if you eat a broccoli, a cauliflower, whatever it might be, that's just the plant itself. The plant obviously has plant defenses for that kind of thing. While if we're looking at a fruit, the outside of the fruit is going to contain anti-nutrients, and the seeds as well. The seeds are always going to contain anti-nutrients because that's where the genetic material is. So you can sit there and eat a watermelon and be happy, but as soon as you bite into a seed, ow, starts itching. So avoid the plant's genetic material and avoid its outside, okay? Always remove the outside. You do that with a watermelon, you do that with an orange, you do that with a banana, so do it with the apple as well. Next, you've got purpose. So what's the purpose of the plant? Is it supposed to just live there? Let's say like a peace lily, like a tree, or is it supposed to be eaten? An orange is supposed to be eaten. Same thing with an apple. Same thing with a watermelon. These things are supposed to be eaten. Same thing with a banana. They can be eaten by you. And then you shit the seeds out and you help the plant reproduce. That's what you did. You spread the seeds. So based on the principle, it's always a safe bet to eat something like an orange or a watermelon as opposed to something like legumes or broccoli that aren't supposed to be eaten. And the last plant principle is, how do you feel? So let's say we throw you together with the Asaro tribe of Papua New Guinea, and you're eating what they're eating, and they're eating quite a lot of starch, and they're giving you the starch. Well, it's prepared perfectly, and they feel really good on it. They don't have any problems with it. Do you feel good on it? Maybe you do, but maybe you don't. Maybe you have Inuit ancestry. Maybe you're from Greenland. You're not supposed to eat starch. You're supposed to eat a lot more fat than they're eating. The essence of this principle is to be vigilant. When you add something, be vigilant and see, okay, how am I affected by this? Then remove it and see what changed. If you're eating something, let's say it's a lot of vegetables with meat, remove the vegetables. See how you feel. And over the period of a few months, or maybe even a week, you can understand things about how you work that will be valuable for the rest of your life. I'd like to thank Frank Tufano for his older anti-nutrient video. I find it really helpful. I used it when making this video. I highly recommend that you check it out. I'll leave a link in the description to it. I'd also like to thank Anthony Chafee for his talk, Are Plants Trying to Kill You? I highly recommend that you check it out. With that said, I do consultations. If you want help with something, if you have some health problem and you don't know where to go, I already have clients under my wing and I'm sure I can help you. And I only accept people that I can help. And you'll notice that if you go to my consultations page. I also have a book that's completely free of cost called Rules of Nutrition. If you read it, you will understand nutrition. And it's better than most of the stuff that's out there, trust me. You can go to excellentlyhealthy.com and it's the first thing you will see. Put in your mail and you'll be resubmitted to my other page, but you will have gotten it in your mail. I also have a book called The 6 Health Commandments. If you like rules of nutrition and you like the way I make these videos and you like the way I write, I recommend that you read that book because it's the main staple of my work. Go and achieve excellent health. I know you can do it.